When I tell people my stepmother sold my deceased mother's wedding ring to buy Botox, they think I'm exaggerating. They think no one could be that cruel. But I remember every second of that day. The sunlight slanting through the kitchen window, the smell of her perfume that always made me nauseous, and the sound of her laughter when she said, "Dead bitches don't need jewelry." That was the moment something inside me went cold. My name is Emily Hart, and for 26 years, I've been learning the hard way that silence can be louder than screaming. My story starts with a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that wasn't worth much in money, but meant everything in memory. It was my mother's wedding ring. My mom, Laura Hart, was the kind of woman everyone in town loved. She volunteered at shelters, made pies for neighbors, and kissed my forehead every night even when she was exhausted from chemo. When she died, I was 16. Still a child, still hoping she'd walk through the door one day and tell me it was all a bad dream. My father, Daniel, was never the same after that. He became quiet, almost hollow. I tried to be strong for both of us, but grief has a way of cracking everything it touches. 2 years later, Vanessa walked into our lives. She was beautiful, tall, blonde, always dressed like she was headed to a photo shoot. She met my dad at his company's accounting firm. Everyone said she brought life back into him. But to me, she felt like an intruder, the kind of person who smiles too wide and looks at your reflection more than your face. At their wedding, she wore a pearl-white gown and fake tears. I forced a smile, holding the small velvet box in my pocket that carried my mother's ring. The last piece of her I had. I remember whispering to it, "I'll take care of you, Mom. Always." For years, I kept that promise. I moved out for college, but visited home every few weeks. I'd notice small changes. The piano gone, my mom's photographs missing from the hallway, her clothes donated without asking me. Vanessa said it was decluttering. I called it erasure. But the real blow came one winter afternoon. I came home for Christmas break expecting warmth and family. Instead, I found a stranger's house. All gray walls, mirrors, and sterile furniture. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. Her lips looked swollen, shiny, and unnatural. I asked, "Where's Mom's jewelry box?" She looked up lazily, sipping her smoothie. "Oh, that old thing. I sold the pieces last month, the ring too." I froze. "You what?" She shrugged. "Relax, Emily. Your mother's been gone for a decade. Dead bitches don't need jewelry, but I needed Botox." Then she laughed. Loud, cruel, echoing through the house like a taunt. I looked at my father, who had just entered the room. His eyes met mine briefly, then drifted away. "It's just a ring," he said softly. "Just a ring." That sentence broke something in me. The man who once kissed my mother's hand every morning was now defending the woman who sold her memory for vanity. I didn't scream or cry, I just stopped. I packed my bag, drove back to my apartment, and didn't call for months. The silence became my armor. But while I stayed quiet, my mind was working. I replayed every smirk, every cruel word, every moment of my father's cowardice. And somewhere between anger and heartbreak, a thought took root. What if silence could be a weapon? I didn't know it then, but that decision, to stay silent, was the first step toward justice. Because when you stop reacting, people start revealing themselves. Vanessa thought I had given up. She flaunted her wealth, her new car, her constant treatments. And all the while, I watched from the distance, waiting for the perfect moment. 6 months later, when I finally invited her and my father to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town, she thought I was apologizing. She even giggled on the phone. Finally, my favorite stepdaughters come to her senses. She had no idea the reservation came with handcuffs, and when the police walked in, her laughter vanished, replaced with panic. I smiled and whispered the word I'd waited half a year to say, justice. My mother, Laura Hart, used to say that love wasn't about grand gestures, but small consistencies, the way someone remembers your coffee order or how they hold your hand during storms. She and my father had that kind of love, simple, steady, safe. Our house in Asheville, North Carolina, was always filled with laughter, music, and the smell of Mom's cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. She'd hum old songs from the 80s while I sat at the counter doing homework, and my dad would come in, kiss her cheek, and pretend to steal the last pastry. I used to think nothing could ever change that. Then cancer happened. It started as a small lump, something routine, but within a year she was too weak to walk without help. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed, clutching her hand as she whispered, "Promise me you'll stay kind, even when the world isn't." I promised. And when she passed away 3 months later, I thought I'd never stop crying. My dad and I barely spoke for weeks. He'd wander through the house like a ghost, sometimes sitting in her favorite chair, staring at nothing. I'd leave meals at his door, but most went untouched. Over time, I learned that grief doesn't disappear. It just changes its shape. My father buried himself in work, avoiding anything that reminded him of her. I tried to fill the silence by focusing on school, volunteering, doing anything that made me feel useful. But the house no longer felt like home. It was like the light had been switched off permanently. 2 years after Mom's death, my father came home with a new woman. Her name was Vanessa Mills, though. She'd soon become Vanessa Hart. She was an accountant at his company. Blonde, polished, confident, the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room. She smiled a lot, but it never reached her eyes. I could tell from the beginning she liked control. The first time we met, she looked me up and down and said, "You must be Emily. Your dad talks about you all the time. You have her eyes." It sounded like a compliment, but her tone made my skin crawl. She didn't say my mother's name, just her, like Mom was an inconvenience we both had to forget. My father, on the other hand, was glowing for the first time in years. He seemed younger, more alive. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. So I tried. I smiled through the engagement dinner, helped plan the wedding, even stood beside him as he said his vows. But when I saw Vanessa slide that gold ring onto his finger, the one my mom used to polish for him every anniversary, something in me tightened. From the start, Vanessa made it clear this was her home now. She replaced Mom's floral curtains with cold gray blinds. The family photos disappeared from the walls, replaced by abstract art that meant nothing. Even the scent of the house changed, from vanilla candles to expensive perfume that smelled like chemicals and arrogance. She'd call me sweetheart in front of guests, but behind closed doors, her mask slipped. Once, I found her tossing out a box of my mother's keepsakes. "These are old memories," she said. "It's time for your dad to move on." I picked the box up before she could throw it in the trash. "Those are my memories," I told her. She smiled tightly, the kind of smile that warns you not to push further. My father pretended not to notice the growing tension. Every time I tried to bring it up, he'd sigh and say, "She's trying her best, Emily. Give her a chance." So I did. For years, I tried. But the cracks were widening. By the time I turned 24, I was living on my own, finishing grad school in psychology, and visiting home only on holidays. Each visit felt heavier. Vanessa was everywhere, planning family trips I wasn't invited to, spending my dad's money like water, and gossiping about the neighbors she pretended to befriend. Still, I held on to one small comfort, my mother's wedding ring. She'd left it for me in her will. Simple, golden, and precious beyond words. I kept it in a velvet box on my dresser, and whenever life got too hard, I'd hold it in my palm and whisper, "I miss you, Mom." That ring was more than jewelry. It was a symbol, proof that love, once real, doesn't die. And maybe that's why losing it hurt more than anything else. Because when Vanessa sold it, it wasn't just about money or greed. It was about her final act of control, the destruction of everything that tied me to the woman she could never replace. In that moment, I stopped being my father's quiet, forgiving daughter. I became something else, someone who would no longer cry quietly in her room, someone who would make sure that the woman who laughed at her mother's memory would soon have no reason to smile at all. It was late autumn when everything finally broke. The trees outside my apartment had started shedding, their bare branches reminding me of loss, of how easily something beautiful can be stripped away. That year marked 10 years since my mother's passing, and I had decided to visit home for her death anniversary. I didn't go often anymore. Every visit with Vanessa around felt like stepping into a museum curated by a stranger. But this time, I wanted to do something small. Bring flowers to Mom's grave, light a candle, and wear her wedding ring close to my heart. The night before I left, I opened my jewelry drawer to take it out. My hand reached for the little velvet box, only it wasn't there. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it. I tore through every drawer, every corner of my apartment, even checked my suitcase and coat pockets. Nothing. My chest tightened. I remembered how I'd shown the ring to Vanessa months ago during one of those forced family dinners. She'd admired it too much, asking how much it was worth. I told her it wasn't about money. It was about memory. The way she smiled after that still haunts me. I drove straight to my father's house early the next morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The house looked the same from the outside, polished, perfect. But the moment I walked in, I felt that same emptiness. Vanessa was in the kitchen, wearing her silk robe, sipping green juice, scrolling through her phone like she owned the world. "Where's my mother's wedding ring?" I asked. She didn't even look up. "Good morning to you too, Emily." My voice rose. "Don't play dumb. You were the only person who had access to my old room." She finally looked at me, her lips plumped, her forehead stiff and expressionless. "Oh, that ring. I sold it." The words hit like a slap. "You what?" "I said I sold it," she repeated, unbothered. "Pawned it last month. Got a decent price. Dead bitches don't need jewelry, but I needed Botox." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world spun around me. My throat burned with anger, but my voice came out small. "You sold my mother's ring to inject poison into your face?" Vanessa tilted her head and smirked. "Careful with your tone, sweetheart. Your father doesn't like drama in his house." Just then, Dad walked in, holding his mug of coffee. He froze when he saw us. "What's going on?" "She sold Mom's ring," I yelled, pointing at Vanessa. "The only thing I had left of her." My father rubbed his temples, sighing as if I were the problem. "Emily, please, it's just a ring." That sentence, "just a ring," broke something deep inside me. I stared at him, tears filling my eyes. It wasn't just a ring. It was Mom. It was her love, her memory. You let her destroy it and you call it just a ring? Vanessa started laughing. "You're so dramatic. No wonder you're still single. Nobody wants all that emotional baggage." That was it. I grabbed my purse and walked out. I didn't scream or cry. I didn't slam doors or throw anything. I just left. But the silence that followed wasn't weakness. It was strategy. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I promised myself I wouldn't waste another tear on them. I'd cried for 10 years. Over my mom, over my father's weakness, over every piece of me that kept forgiving people who didn't deserve it. No more. Weeks passed. My father tried calling a few times, leaving guilt-soaked voicemails like, "You're overreacting, Emily. Vanessa didn't mean any harm." I never answered. But while I ignored his calls, I started digging. I remembered Vanessa's obsession with luxury, the constant shopping, spa visits, expensive jewelry, and her endless bragging about managing the household finances. But my father wasn't rich enough to fund all that, not legally, at least. So I started looking closer. Using what I'd learned in grad school, I traced patterns, subtle ones. My dad's company had an online employee directory. I found Vanessa's name listed under accounts management. I contacted a friend, Lena, who worked in finance. I told her, "I think my stepmother's stealing from my father." At first, Lena thought I was exaggerating. Then I sent her a few of Vanessa's posts. Luxury handbags, fine dining, new diamond earrings every other week. Lena pulled a few discreet strings. Within days, she called me back, whispering, "Emily, your stepmom's been transferring company funds into her personal account for months. Fake vendors, fake invoices. It's bad." I sat there in silence, the air leaving my lungs. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was crime. But I didn't rush. I didn't confront her. I'd learned my lesson. Silence could be sharper than a blade. So I started collecting proof. Every post, every transaction record Lena sent, every photo Vanessa flaunted online. I saved it all in a folder titled Justice. And the more evidence I gathered, the calmer I felt. Because this time, I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to make her pay, not with words, but with consequences. And when she least expected it, when she thought I had finally forgiven her, I'd make sure she'd face every ounce of humiliation she'd ever made me feel. After weeks of collecting documents, screenshots, and bank records, anger had turned into a precise, cold focus. I did not want a spectacle. I wanted proof, a paper trail so clean that anyone who saw it would understand Vanessa's pattern of theft without needing my dramatics. I made a folder on my laptop labeled Justice and filled it with invoices, screenshots of transfers, and copies of her online posts showing purchases that matched missing company funds. Every file tightened the knot I had been pulling for months. I reached out to Detective Ryan Brooks, a family friend who had once worked cold cases and who had known my mother from charity events. He listened without interruption when I explained everything. Then he said the kind of sentence I had been waiting to hear. If we can corroborate these transactions with bank records and witness statements, we can get an arrest warrant. His voice was steady. That steadiness made me steadier. Ryan ran his checks. He confirmed there were suspicious transfers from my father's company to shell vendor accounts that later funneled money into Vanessa's accounts. He arranged to subpoena invoices and obtain bank confirmations. He also warned me about what would happen next. The legal system moves deliberately. It would take time, and it might sting. I told him I understood. Time was my ally because Vanessa believed I had withdrawn from the fight. That belief made her careless. While Ryan worked with the DA and the company's internal auditors to verify the fraud, I practiced a different type of preparation. I rehearsed how I would act the night of the reveal. I wrote down phrases I would not say. I reminded myself not to gloat. I knew humiliation would be punishment enough. I wanted the law to do the rest. I also prepared for the worst, that my father might never forgive me for orchestrating his wife's public downfall. That reality sat heavy in the pit of my stomach, but it did not deter me. The plan came together quietly. The DA filed charges once the auditors confirmed the missing funds and Vanessa's name on the receiving accounts. Ryan called and told me they had probable cause. They could get an arrest warrant the next day. He asked where and when the best place to serve it would be. I chose a public place where Vanessa would be off guard and surrounded by witnesses. I wanted her arrogance to crumble, where everyone could see it. I invited my father and Vanessa to dinner at the Sapphire Room, a place Vanessa adored for its velvet booths and mirrored walls. I told my father I wanted to talk, to finally let the past be the past. I told Vanessa I wanted to celebrate my mother's legacy because I knew she loved attention and would relish a fancy evening. Both accepted. Vanessa even called me in the afternoon, her tone syrupy. "I'm so glad we're finally making progress as a family," she gushed. I kept my voice neutral. "See you tonight," I said. I bought a simple dress my mother would have liked, nothing flashy, and a delicate necklace that had belonged to Laura. Wearing it felt like carrying a talisman. At the restaurant, I arrived early. Ryan and 2 uniformed officers positioned themselves discreetly near the entrance. An undercover officer took a table nearby to watch Vanessa's reactions. The restaurant staff, briefed and cooperative, kept the timing precise. When they arrived, Vanessa was radiant in a new designer coat, a bracelet glinting at her wrist. She linked arms with my father and smiled like she always did when she wanted people to admire her. She did not expect accusation. She expected applause. That expectation made the moment of the arrest sharper. I sat across from them, calm, folding my napkin. I let our small talk play out for exactly 3 minutes because I wanted Vanessa to feel the ordinary before the extraordinary happened. I asked about her new skincare routine. She boasted. I asked about a charity she donated to. She lied. It was all bait to keep her talking and revealing patterns that matched the evidence we already had. As dessert arrived, Ryan stood and walked to our table. He introduced himself formally and explained that there was an active warrant for Vanessa's arrest on charges of embezzlement and theft. Her face changed in a millisecond from smug to disbelieving to terrified. She stammered, "This is a mistake. My husband will—" My father's face registered confusion, then dawning horror as Ryan explained the transactions and showed a copy of the subpoena. Vanessa began to scream and flail, begging, pleading, trying to make the scene about anything but the documents laid out with methodical clarity. I remained calm. I could feel my heart hammering, but I kept my voice low. I said, "You sold my mother's ring and laughed about it. You called her a dead bitch. You stole from the people who trusted you." The officers read her the charges. They cuffed her. She lunged, then folded, dragged out of the restaurant while nearby diners watched. People recorded on their phones. She struggled to keep her dignity and failed. When the noise faded and the officers led Vanessa away, my father sat frozen. I saw the regret move across his features like a tide. He had to decide whether to come after us or to let the law finish what I had started. He chose silently. He did not stand in her defense. In that instant, I understood the price of choosing justice over silence. It was heavy and it complicated relationships. I also understood that some things are worth that price. I had not wanted vengeance for spectacle. I had wanted accountability. Tonight, Vanessa would face the consequences of choices she made in plain view. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, silence had done more than screaming ever could. The sapphire room smelled like lemon and butter. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across the mirrored walls. People around us talked in low, cultivated voices. Vanessa loved this, the way the room reflected her, making her look like a star. She leaned back in her seat and laughed at a story my father told about a client. I watched her hand flash across the table, the bracelet catching light, and for a moment everything felt unbearably ordinary. That ordinary was my design. Ryan had told me to stay calm, to act natural, and to let the law do the rest. I had written down phrases I would not say. I had practiced a neutral smile in the mirror. But when the moment came, rehearsals didn't matter so much as presence. I needed to be steady. I needed to be clear. I needed to own what had been taken from me without turning it into theater. We ordered wine. Vanessa tasted each bite as if the world owed her pleasure. She described a spa treatment she'd just had, rattling off terms I barely understood. My father smiled at her and squeezed her hand. He still believed in the story she sold him, a life restarted, a future repaired. He didn't see the ledger balancing out at her expense. Dessert arrived, a creme brulee with a perfect glassy top. The server set it down between us like a small, harmless ceremony. Ryan rose from his table with the measured gait of someone who has done this before. 2 uniformed officers flanked him. The restaurant went from warm murmur to a tense silence in a single breath. "Vanessa Hart?" Ryan asked, his voice calm and direct. She blinked at him. "Yes?" Her smile faltered. For the first time that night, she looked faintly off balance. "You're under arrest for embezzlement and theft," he said, and he handed a copy of the subpoena to the restaurant manager, who had been instructed ahead of time. The legal paper looked oddly formal against the velvet napkin. Vanessa's lips parted. She tried to laugh, then clutched at her chest as if the air had gone thin. My father's face moved from confusion to alarm to an absence of comprehension so sharp it hurt to watch. He asked, "What are you talking about?" Ryan explained, step by step. Transactions that matched purchases, invoices from vendors that never existed, company funds diverted into accounts that led to Vanessa. He slid printouts across the table. The evidence was clinical, ordinary numbers that added up to betrayal. Vanessa reached for the subpoena like someone trying to snatch back a thrown-away memory. "This is a mistake," she said. "Someone's going to correct this. Daniel, call your lawyer. This is ridiculous." Her voice climbed, her composure cracked. A woman at the next table lifted her phone and whispered, "Is that who I think it is?" Someone else leaned forward, eyes wide. Phones came out. I felt the room tilt as other diners realized a scene had begun. She started to scream. It was raw and high, a sound meant to fracture attention away from the facts. "You have no right," she cried. "You can't do this here. This is my home. This is my family." She pointed at my father as if accusing him of staging the whole thing. He sat still, the color draining from his face. Ryan spoke quietly. "Ma'am, we have a warrant. Please stand up and cooperate." The officers moved in. Vanessa resisted. She clawed at the cuff an officer tried to place on her wrist. She pushed and shoved. Someone recorded. Someone else gasped. Her pearl-white blouse wrinkled as the officers steadied her shoulders. For a moment, I heard only her screams and the clink of cutlery. Then I heard my voice behind the quiet like a bell. "You sold my mother's ring," I said, and every head turned. "You laughed about it. You said dead women don't need jewelry. You stole from the man who trusted you." Her face snapped toward me. Rage, fear, shame. Every shade crossed it in a single heartbeat. "How dare you?" she spat. "You—" She grasped for words and came up with nothing clean. The cameras in the room kept rolling. A stranger's phone captured Vanessa's face as she changed from beautiful to desperate. My father watched this collision of facts and feeling. His hand went to his mouth. He whispered, "Emily," as if calling me back to some earlier life where things had been simpler. I walked to him, soft but firm, and placed my hand over his. He looked at me the way you look at someone you love and suddenly recognize an ocean between you. When the officers led Vanessa away, she kicked her heels against the carpet and screamed accusations at anyone who would listen. Her voice grew hoarse. People around us stood, some in judgment, some in curiosity. The restaurant held its breath and then, like a tide, returned to its meal. Conversation resumed in threads. A little later, someone applauded awkwardly and then stopped as if embarrassed. The cameras left as quickly as they had arrived. In that brief chaos, my feelings were sharp and complicated. Vindication warmed me like sunlight on cold skin. There was also sorrow, because justice could not give back a mother or rewind years of small cruelties. There was also a terrible loneliness. My father had not risen to stop her. He had been complicit through silence. That realization landed with terrible weight. As the officers closed the door behind Vanessa and the glass reflected a room that had witnessed everything, I leaned back and tasted the burnt sugar of the crème brûlée. I felt oddly empty and oddly relieved. I whispered the word I had rehearsed in the quiet months leading up to this night. It was small, but it measured everything I'd been holding. Justice. The word settled between us, precise and inevitable. The morning after the arrest, the house felt heavier than ever. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News outlets had picked up the story about a local accountant charged with embezzling from her husband's firm. Vanessa's mugshot was everywhere. She looked nothing like the polished woman I had known. No makeup, no filters, no charm. Just pale skin, hollow eyes, and the faint bruise of handcuffs around her wrist. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt satisfied that justice had finally caught up with her. But as I sat by the window sipping black coffee, watching the rain streak down the glass, what I felt was complicated. Justice was clean in courtrooms, but messy in real life. Later that day, my father called. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Emily," he said, "we need to talk." When he arrived at my apartment, he looked older, not by years, but by regret. His shoulders were slouched, his eyes bloodshot. He took off his wedding ring and set it on the table between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it." I nodded. "You didn't just miss it, Dad. You ignored it. Every time she disrespected Mom, every time she lied to me, you looked the other way." He rubbed his hands together, trembling. "I thought I was moving on. I thought she cared about me." "She cared about your bank account," I replied. The words came out sharper than I intended. I softened my tone. "You wanted comfort, Dad. I get that. But you let her erase Mom, piece by piece. And then you let her humiliate me." He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I failed both of you." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the closest I'd ever get. We sat there for a long time, two broken people surrounded by the echoes of a woman who had once held our world together. In the weeks that followed, the investigation deepened. Vanessa faced multiple counts of fraud, theft, and falsifying records. The company's board pressed charges. She tried to claim my father was complicit, but the paper trail proved otherwise. Her bail was denied. She would remain in custody until trial. My father filed for divorce quietly. There was no spectacle, no confrontation, just silence. The kind that used to mean avoidance, but now meant acceptance. One afternoon, he came to see me again carrying a small velvet box. My chest tightened when I saw it. "I went to the pawn shop," he said softly. "They still had it." Inside was my mother's wedding ring, a little scratched, slightly duller than before, but still beautiful. I held it in my palm and felt warmth rise to my throat. "Dad," I whispered, "thank you." He gave a small, broken smile. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see what mattered." We decided to do something together, something my mother would have approved of. We took her remaining jewelry and donated it to a foundation that provided financial help for women battling breast cancer. I could almost hear her voice saying, "Do good with what's left, Emily. Let love outlive pain." That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote that justice isn't about revenge, it's about balance. It's about giving pain a purpose. I had spent years trying to make peace with silence, but that silence had been my greatest teacher. It had taught me how to listen, not just to words, but to patterns, to actions, to truths people tried to bury. When Vanessa stole from my father, she thought she was clever. When she mocked my mother, she thought she was powerful. But what she never understood was that cruelty leaves fingerprints. Eventually, someone will find them. Months later, her trial began. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. The outcome was already public. Guilty on all counts. 3 years in prison. My father called me afterward, his voice trembling again. "It's over," he said. But for me, it wasn't about ending. It was about closure. I drove to the cemetery that evening. The sun was setting behind the trees, the light gold and soft. I knelt beside my mother's grave, placed the wedding ring on top of the stone for a moment, and whispered, "You can rest now." The breeze picked up, rustling the flowers. I took that as her answer. As I stood to leave, I realized something I hadn't before. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't always come with applause or revenge speeches. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of peace. When I got home, I slipped the ring onto a chain around my neck. It no longer symbolized loss. It symbolized endurance. In the end, I didn't win by shouting or fighting. I won by staying steady, by believing that truth has its own gravity. And every time I catch the glint of that gold band against my skin, I remember the lesson that changed my life. Revenge fades, but justice restores. And peace, real peace, is the most beautiful inheritance a mother can leave behind. If you believe that justice always finds its way home, like this video, share it with someone who needs strength. Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of courage and truth.